Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to today's meeting of the Adults, Communities Overview and Scrutiny Committee. And thank you to all the attendees, particularly the Chairman and Vice Chairman of the other scrutiny groups who've come for one of the agenda items on carers. I'd like to remind everybody that the meeting will be on webinar, and I believe this now links into YouTube as well. So we're not just on webinar, we're on YouTube as well. So I'll have to work out how to look at YouTube. Just as per normal, when you speak, please put on your microphone, and please remember to turn it off when finishing. Now, in view of the fact we have the chairman of one of the other scrutiny groups here, we propose to take agenda item 9 first, but before we get there, I'll just work through the other items. So, agenda item 1, minutes of the meeting held on the 5th of June. So I propose the minutes be taken as read, confirmed and signed. Everybody happy?
Agreed.
Thank you. Right, question time, agenda item 2, we have received no questions from members of the public. Under agenda item 3, we have no questions from members under standing orders. Agenda item 4, I have not been notified of any urgent items. Agenda item 5, do members have any declarations of interest they wish to make? Right, thank you. Under agenda item 6, I have no declarations from the party whips that I'm aware of. And we have under agenda item 7, we have no petitions have been presented under standing orders. So we go straight into agenda item 8, which commences on page 13. Oh, sorry, I've talked myself out of it. I mentioned it and then forgot. That was a good start, wasn't it? We're going to do agenda item 9, which commences on page 113. And over to John. Can't go over to Sandy, he's not here.
Thank you, Chair. So agenda item 9 is the joint report of the Director of Adults and Communities and Children, Family Services and Public Health, and it presents a committee with the outcome from and the results from the public consultation on the joint Leicestershire and Rutland Carers Strategy. And members may recall that it is now some time since we brought the draft strategy to committee prior to consultation, and the intervening period has been lengthy due to the nature of the strategy and the number of partners involved. And clearly one of the issues within that is that we have to seek assurance and go through the governance processes of the various different organisations, 6 different organisations that are involved in this particular strategy. So attached to the report is the updated strategy document, which we intend to report to the County Council's Cabinet in October. The public consultation feedback on the strategy, the consultation ran from the 28th of February 2018 through to the 22nd of April 2018 and consisted of online questionnaires, public events and targeted consultations. The report for Leicestershire, attached as Appendix B, summarises the consultation outcomes. 230 responses received to the consultation, of which 69% were from Leicestershire residents. 63% of respondents were in receipt of some form of carers service, and 73% of respondents felt that the strategy reflected their issues. 82% of respondents agreed with the priorities, and 79% of the Leicestershire respondents agreed with the delivery actions. So the County Council, as I said, will be asked through the Cabinet to approve the final version of the strategy on the 16th of October. Although we have developed a joint strategy across the Leicestershire and Rutland and across health and social care organisations, each organisation will have its own individual implementation plan. So the implementation plan that will go with the strategy for Leicestershire County Council will be the County Council's implementation plan. The Leicester City will have a Leicester City implementation plan. Rutland equally will have a Rutland plan. So it will reflect the local responses that came through the consultation. So although we had a joint consultation and we have a joint strategy which feels appropriate to support people across the wider area, the actual implementation will be detailed to support the individual residents of Leicestershire. I think that's probably all I'll say at this point, Chair, but obviously welcome to take comments.
All right, thank you, John. Do I have any questions? Sorry, Mrs. Fry.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The item I'm looking at is the findings, the overview and the consultation. As you said, it went for 6 or 8 weeks. I'm wondering whether we are doing the consultation correctly or we're hitting the right, because 230 responses does not seem a very high figure or a number of responses, and I'm just wondering whether the right questions were asked and simplified and it was made easy enough for people to answer, or was it just done online? Although you did mention it was, I think you said there were some events that people went to, and I just feel that the amount of time and effort that went into this consultation just to get 230 responses is quite sad. Can we take it that the rest of the county are quite happy with what we're doing and don't feel they need to comment, or are we not doing it with enough emphasis and knowledge? Do we involve, for example, sorry, this is a supplementary question, you haven't given me the first answer, I do apologise, but do we involve our councillors enough in promoting or getting involved with these consultations? And I don't mean just the ones that sit on the scrutiny committees, but all 55 of us. Could we not help a bit more, even by just advertising or making sure it's advertised in our areas? Thank you. Thank you, Mr.
Thank you, Chair. If I could just respond. I think the level of response to this consultation is not untypical of the level of responses we'd get, which are quite variable. I think where you're proposing service changes, you very often have more responses than where you're proposing a strategic document. Because I think quite a lot of carers might feel that they want to actually see the detail of how it's going to affect them before they would respond. The other thing I'd say is that there'd been very significant engagement with carers and the carers sector generally prior to the consultation. So the consultation it wasn't kind of invented by the council or even by the strategic partners. It very much came out of a series of discussions over many months with carers organisations and individual carers about what they wanted to see in the strategy. So to some extent, if you don't get a lot of negative response, I think it's a sign that that engagement's worked and you've actually produced something that people recognise and actually kind of corresponds with their experience and the kinds of issues they'd expect to be in a strategy. Having said that, you know, we always want to get more engagement and always want to maximise the opportunities that are available. In terms of how we engage with members, clearly we brought the report here, and there was a members' news and brief item about the consultation advising members that it was underway. I think we'd always be open to ideas about how we can really use. I mean, I think it's more about using the networks that members have, and how we can do that. And certainly we want to respond to any requests that members might have to engage with groups that in your divisions. I'm certainly happy to consider those if members want to contact the contacts for consultations, because those would be in the members' news and brief. If there's specific groups of people that you think we could engage with to mutual benefit, we certainly want to do that.
If I may, Chair. I think yes, because in my own division, I know of 3 or 4 different groups that meet weekly, almost, with older people, people that are looking after other people, that may not be necessarily on your radar, because they meet in a social situation. But those are the type of places that papers or the actual thing can be go in, and they can discuss it among themselves and make a thing. And I think I don't know that we are always used well enough with our contacts and the way we communicate with our residents, whether we could be used more, if you like, make more use of us. Thank you.
Dr. Arn.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for inviting me onto this committee where I'm substituting for Councillor Newton, who unfortunately can't be here. I think this is a very helpful report, and clearly a lot of work has had to go into it over much time, and I think you've mentioned the 6 sets of governance. And one comment I'd like to make is that I'm a little concerned that having come to a joint strategy, that there is a risk of there being a fragmented implementation, and I think this is something that will probably come up later when we discuss other items on the agenda. I also wanted to comment on page 161, one of the comments from one of the key themes being that carers agree that sometimes the way in which services are provided can actually create a level of carer strain, and I'd be interested in your views on that. And then my main question, which is about, on page 155, one of the comments was about GPs, and on a page 100, or rather the lack of helpfulness of GPs, and this is where I declare a former interest. I'm no longer working as a GP, which is very lovely, but I look and see that what we're going to do is create a GP link pack for carers and GP staff. The trouble is, when you've spent as long as I did being a GP, I know that we've done things like this on many occasions in the past, and we don't seem to get terribly much further. And I do have some ideas about probably why we're not getting any further, but to keep doing the same thing again and expecting a different result is generally thought to be mad. So I'd be interested in your views on perhaps how we might be able to do something a bit differently to get better identification of carers.
I'll provide a response to a couple of those points, and Sandy probably want to also. I think in terms of the first point that you make, it's essentially, we've got a joint strategy, why don't we have a joint implementation plan? As I said earlier, I think one of the intentions is to ensure that the actions that we take are relevant to the local population, and certainly within the consultation, within the pre-engagement, there are differences in terms of some of the service offers that are currently there, so we're not all starting from the same place. We have different service offers in place to begin with. Some of the priorities for residents of Leicestershire will be different to the priorities for the residents of Leicester City. I think there's also a recognition that each of the organisations are in different places in terms of their strategic thinking and in terms of their resource bases. So having a separation of the implementation plans allows us to target the implementation towards the local communities that we are all responsible for and that we all work with, but it also reflects the different aspirations and the different resource bases that different organisations have in terms of their ability to respond to the needs of carers and the wider population. So I think this is probably something that we will see more often in the future as we develop joint strategic intent, and I think that's the right thing to do. Across sort of the sub-region, it's very helpful to have a similar strategic intent, but the way that those intents are then implemented in practice will be different across the different places within the Leicestershire and Rutland boundaries. So that's kind of the first point I would make. In terms of the issue around the GPs, and Sandy might want to talk about this, you're probably correct in saying that it hasn't always been successful in terms of engaging GPs and primary care in the round around carer support services. I think I would also suggest that none of us are, as organisations, are in a position of sort of taking the moral high ground on this one, because I think we all have quite a journey to go in terms of the way we support carers. When we speak to carers, though, one of the things that they do consistently tell us is that they do want information, advice and coordination through primary care, because that is the one place that everybody goes. It's the one common denominator for everybody. Not all the carers will be known to social care, not all carers will be known to other organisations, but everybody uses primary care. So it is a very helpful place to try to engage with carers. We just perhaps need to work harder at doing that. But Sandy might want to add to that.
Yeah, I think I'd echo what John has said. I think it is a difficult job, and given the length of time that GPs spend with carers, you know, you've got to be realistic about what can be achieved in that kind of window. But I think the aspiration is much more to have primary care as a place where you can get information, not necessarily something that's a discussion with the GP in the consultation. And it's how do we use that place as a point at which you can then access other sources of advice and information. Because very often what carers are not wanting is in a kind of intensive service offer. They're just wanting to access networks of support. And people don't know how to navigate their way through the system. So having that as a navigation point, I think, is probably what we're trying to do, rather than sort of add another task onto the GP's list of things to do. I think that the second point you're making about do the responses we make in the services we offer actually add strain onto carers, because clearly some of the feedback was saying that. And I think a lot of the problem is kind of back to navigation, and that if you don't know where to go, that's another barrier and another stress that you might have. And if you have the feeling you're being passed from pillar to post to, you know, various unresponsive services that pass you on to somebody else who's equally unresponsive, that's going to be very difficult and stressful, and people are going to kind of give up and feel abandoned. So I think what we're trying to do is get those critical points at which carers might contact us to be more responsive and helpful. And one of the things that we've done is put some dedicated staff into the customer service centre, because one of the bits of feedback we had from carers that use the customer service centre was that the person they talked to on the phone didn't seem to understand kind of the issues that who a carer was, and the kinds of stresses they might have, and the kinds of input they'd be looking for. So we're having dedicated staff within the customer service centre who understand those issues and are able to much more quickly respond and put people in touch with sources of advice and information. And that's only recently started, so I think we haven't had much feedback about how it's going, but that's very much trying to respond to that issue that was raised by carers.
I think that's very helpful, and particularly the customer service intervention, because one of the things that I know at various points in the primary care journey since the Health and Social Care Act, there has been attempts to have care navigators in primary care, and at the moment I think they're so out of favour that the 3 CCGs are actually cutting their clinical coordinator staff, according to a meeting of the 3 CCGs that I attended recently. So I am worried still about fragmentation in the overall strategy, and pleased to hear what we're doing at this end. It does sound very positive. Will there be some way of measuring the overall strategic outcome of all these different implementation plans?
I mean, we do need to get the perspective of carers from that, and we do the annual. It's a biannual survey now of carers, which follows the standard methodology. So that asks carers questions like how easy it is to find information, their overall levels of satisfaction, the extent to which services, meet their needs. So we will get really good feedback. Now currently, the feedback we've got from carers through that survey isn't particularly positive. But neither is it in most authorities. I mean, I think the majority of carers, their responses are relatively negative, but our responses are not as good as we'd want them to be, and carers aren't as satisfied and aren't giving us as positive feedback as we'd want. So certainly we'd hope as we implement the changes, we'd expect to see those indicators improving, and we've made it a priority in terms of the kind of changes we want to see. We want to get our carers offer much improved, and the kind of feedback we get from carers much more positive.
Mr. Welsh.
Thank you, Chair. I'm here from Children and Family Services, so my interest is only in that area, and I'd like to thank the Chair for the kind invitation to today's meeting. Thank you very much, Terry. Page 143, which is priority 8 of the draft strategy, which is supporting young carers. I was very pleased on the left-hand side of the box, of the table, to see the identification of clearly what are the key areas of interest to young carers, particularly the bottom one on the left, where it talks of young carers identified the need to be young people and not just carers, leading to the need for time off or respite care. And I think we put a particular load upon young carers in society, and we need to be very sensitive to their needs as individuals. So it's great to see it identified. My problem with this strategy is in what will we do? If I was the young person reading the two statements, I'd find them a little bit bland, and I'm not sure whether we can address it, but it would be nice to feel that there was a bullet point there that addressed that specific need for young people's respite, and I don't know if that's possible. Thank you, Chair.
Yeah, I think your point's well made, and the feedback we had from a number of young carers was that there was needed to be more work done in identifying exactly what was going to be offered to young carers, and the final strategy will recognise there is further engagement to be done with young carers. I think we have to fully understand what it is that they want. I mean, I think the last thing we should do is make a set of presumptions about what's good for young carers. Actually, we've got to really understand what it is that they think will make a difference to them. So there will be some further engagement work. So to some extent, the actions in relation to young carers still will require some further work, and when the strategy goes to cabinet, they will say that there needs to be that further engagement with young carers to make sure that we get that right.
Mr. Sheehan.
Yeah, I'm here for the same reason, and I'm focused on the exact same issues. So I'm looking at page 143 and 168, where there are some actions listed to address some of the issues identified in the document, particularly page 143. I mean, it strikes me that young people are having to try to be adults while they're still coming to terms with growing up as a child in today's world. And it seems a little unfair that they're burdened with these care responsibilities. And if we don't address the impact it's going to have on their education, on their social life, on forming and sustaining friendships, on their eventual employment, and making sure they've got some time off, then we're not doing them justice. So I think it'd be interesting to hear what officers had in mind when they say prioritise group work support for young carers, targeted to their needs, and work with partners in the PVI sector to provide a range of respite opportunities. I wonder if we can have some examples of what that would be. And also, how do we approach the issue of making sure there's a balance between the caring responsibilities and their education needs, just to make sure that we're not getting it wrong and leaving them unsupported and probably in difficulties later on in life. Yeah?
I think I can probably respond to some of those points. I think some of them we may need to get a response from children and family services in relation to some of those points, particularly around what's been done to support children with their educational progress, for instance. I don't think I'm best placed to respond to that. I think just checking back to the earlier point about we do need to further engage with young carers, really, I think, to understand some of these issues. But a lot of the time, there'll be two sets of responses to the needs of all carers, including young carers. Some of those are actually making sure that the person they're supporting receives the support that they need in their own right as somebody with care needs or support needs. And quite a lot of the time when what's described as kind of respite can actually just mean the individual actually just getting the support maybe out of the family home that they need themselves. And that means that it'll have a dual impact. The carer will have opportunities to do something else while that individual's away from the family home, for instance. So I think a lot of the time it's about making sure you get the support for the service user right, rather than for the carer. And quite a lot of the time, that's really what people want. They want to make sure that the support for the person that they care for is right, and that also they make the right level of contribution to the plans for that person. So I think some of the times it will be making sure that those things are right. In relation to how we support the young carers themselves, most of that service is provided by the service provided by Bernardo's, which is commissioned by the council to support groups of young carers, and that's the principal support deliverer for young carers. And again, I mean, I can't give you a lot of detail in terms of what that offer is, but again, that's something that we could provide more detail on if you particularly want that.
Yeah, I'd appreciate that. I mean, we have corporate parenting responsibility. I think that applies equally to this department and to individual counsellors as it does to children and families, indeed the council as a whole. So I think we need to make sure that the two areas are joined up in terms of the thinking and their actions. And yes, I think you've got a responsibility for making sure carers and the people they're caring for are properly supported. I think in doing so, you need to be more proactive perhaps with children and families to make sure they're holding up their end of the bargain by providing the support, or Bernardo's or whoever are doing what they can, and that what's actually on offer is something comprehensive and cohesive, so that young person's journey through life is not hampered and interrupted by overly burdensome responsibilities. Somebody needs an overview of that person's development and go out of the way to make sure they are being looked after in a proper and sensible way.
Any more questions? Right, I think we've been asked obviously to note the report which we've done. I think some valuable points being raised, particularly over consultation, particularly over how we might work better with primary care to actually signpost some of these things. And certainly it would seem sense with the Chairman of Children's and Families was made aware of the comments made today by Mr. Sheehan and Mr. Welsh about the children's, because that may be an area they might wish to look into. I can't prejudge what the chairman and the committee might want to do, but if it's it's clearly important to people, and it may be a specific area they would wish to look into. And while I'm here, could I also thank Mr. Sheehan and Mr. Welsh for taking the time to come today to contribute to this important item. So thank you for that. We'll now move back to agenda item 8, he says, which is on pages 13 to 112, and is the Lives We Want to Lead, which is the LGA Green Paper for adult social care and wellbeing that's been issued. I think John's taking this one.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, the report in front of us today details the LGA Green Paper document, The Lives We Want to Lead. The document itself has been published in response to the delay in the government Green Paper on adult social care, which was announced in 2017, but which has been delayed in terms of its publication on a number of occasions and is now on its third government minister. And although we are still hoping that that paper will be published in the autumn of this year, I think the LGA decided that in order to maintain the momentum and to ensure that government were aware of the significant pressures facing adult social care, and particularly local authorities, they decided to publish their own version of a green paper in the lead up to that. And effectively what the LGA are trying to do is to stimulate debate, to ask a series of questions, and to start to form opinion ahead of the publication of the government's green paper. So the LGA paper, whilst focusing on adult social care specifically, and the funding challenges therein, also takes a much broader view of well-being. And in that sense, the LGA are also raising questions and asking for debate about wider local government functions and services and funding. And there's a recognition within that adult social care reform doesn't happen in isolation, and that you have to look beyond just social care into areas of public health, housing and other local authority services if we want to support well-being in our communities. So the LGA paper starts with a view of a notion of how social care impacts on the lives of individuals. It talks about the challenges that some of the individuals who receive social care have, and how social care can improve people's lives. It then goes on to talk about why social care matters, and it talks about the economic case for investment in sustainable social care, not just for those people who need to receive it, but for the national and local community, the wider community. So the paper recognises that there is a contribution. £46 billion is the estimated contribution that social care makes to the economy. But there's also a contribution that social care has made over the last 8-9 years of austerity in terms of the local government efficiency agenda. And within that, there's a recognition that whilst it's absolutely appropriate that social care is delivered locally and reflects local need, there's also a recognition that there is an increasing variation in the outcomes around social care in different parts of the country, some of which may be linked to funding, but some of which will be linked to other matters and policy matters and delivery matters. It's not exclusively a funding issue, but clearly the LGA is aware of that variation and the need to address that variation. So in terms of the funding challenges facing local government, the LGA quotes a projected gap of funding for local government overall of £7.8 billion by 2025, and that includes an immediate £1.4 billion gap in social care funding, which rises over that same period to £3.6 billion. I think before we go on to the actual funding challenges themselves, there are also a number of matters that need to be kind of raised within that. One is the issue of quality. So again, it's although the majority of social care services are rated as good or excellent by the Care Quality Commission, there are an increasing number of providers who are struggling to meet the demands placed on them. Part of that struggle is around workforce. The current workforce of 1.5 million people is estimated to have to grow by nearly 50% over the next 10 years. Part of those issues around quality are also to do with the funding challenge. And certainly as we start to look at what some of those funding options are, paying a fair price for care is one of the issues that the LGA raise. In terms of the options for change, the LGA notes that there are some immediate pressures and some future pressures. So they take a two-stranded approach to the debate. So the first strand is to say we must meet the immediate pressures. So that's paying providers the right amount for provision of services, but it's also making sure that there are sufficient services in place to meet the needs of the population. And the LGA, I think there's probably a fairly wide base of agreement that there are increasing numbers of people who have unmet needs within local areas. Nationally, that's potentially 500,000 people. But the LGA also raise a new kind of area of debate, which is people who have undermet needs, what they're classing as undermet needs. So these are people who are having their needs met, but possibly aren't having all of their needs met. Now, I think there is further work to do around the research around that and to evaluate that and to evidence that. But nevertheless, what the LGA is saying is actually, if we want to have a fully funded social care system, we have to address all of those issues. And then having addressed all of those issues, we need to make sure that the funding solutions for social care and the way that social care is funded is transparent to people and is fair and is equitable. So in terms of meeting both of those two requirements, the estimate within the LGA paper is that just to do the first of those, to meet the existing requirements, potentially has a bill of £8.5 billion by 2025. And then if we want to reform the funding system and to make it fairer and more transparent, a further 4.7 billion to 6.4 billion would be required. So that 4.7 billion would be to implement a cap and floor to the current funding and charging process, and that's the cap and floor is essentially the process that was first introduced through the Dill-Knott review and was part of the original Care Act that in 2015 that was never implemented, part 2 of the Care Act that was never implemented. Going further than the cap and floor would be to provide people with free personal care, and that would cost 6.4 billion. So having outlined those kind of potential costs to the system, the LGA then proposed a range of suggestions about how those care costs could be met. And whilst the LGA is not suggesting a preferred option, what they are saying is that actually a mix of solutions may be required, and they give a range of those solutions at paragraph 42 in the report. Some of those solutions are around means testing of universal benefits, some form of social care premium as an insurance premium, an increase to income tax for all, an increase in national insurance, continuing the increases in council tax, the precepts that were introduced a couple of years ago, and starting to think about other forms of charges such as continuing healthcare packages. And clearly each of those raises a different amount of income and has a different level of sustainability, and also each of those will affect different ranges of the population in terms of fairness, equity, and how we pay for care. In terms of thinking about that, and that will certainly be part of the consultation response that we put forward, it may well be that there are solutions in the short and medium term, and there may be longer term solutions. So it may not be a single answer in terms of thinking about that. As I said earlier, the report doesn't just focus on social care. So there is also a chapter on thinking about the wider well-being of the local community and the role of local authorities, and particularly focusing on public health, and the LGA recognising that if we want to have a sustainable health and social care system, we need to have a sustainable public health system. And the current reductions that are planned to the public health funding will undoubtedly have an impact on health and social care services. The report then also asks questions about other elements of local authority and local government service and provision which impact on health and social care and which need to be made sustainable if we were to have a sustainable health and social care system. And then finally the report goes on to talk about the links between social care and the NHS, the integration agenda, how we can forward the integration agenda, how we can ensure that we have personalised health and social care, but also in terms of the governance of health and social care. The report asks a number of questions about the role of health and wellbeing boards and the relationship particularly between health and wellbeing boards and sustainability and transformation partnerships, and how we have more local accountability and potentially democratic accountability within the NHS at a local level. The consultation response itself is due in by the 26th of September. The report in front of us today will be going to the County Council Cabinet at the end of this week, and we'll be seeking to approve a delegation of the responsibility for submitting that response to myself and the Director of Finance in consultation with the lead member for Adult Social Care and the lead member for Finance. But clearly any comments that we could include from the conversation through committee today, we would be wanting to express within that consultation document. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, John, for that exhaustive presentation. Just before I ask the question, open it to questions, one of the things, clearly you've got to respond to the 30 questions starting on page 100. And we understand that. We understand that Cabinet are looking to give delegated authority to yourself and to Richard. Do you have any initial thoughts from either or both of you what you believe that response is going to look like? I mean, it's difficult for us to sort of raise questions and put thoughts if you've already given some considerable thought to what the response of LCC might be. So I don't expect you to go through all 30 questions. I just wonder if you're able to give us an overall flavour of what you believe the stance of LCC might be, and presumably there will be a commitment, I trust, that we will see the response as this committee once it's been made.
Chairman, I think the document is a very good document. In fact, what it does is it really tells a story that if you happen to be a new Secretary of State for Health and Adult Social Care, this would give you a really good document to start with. And I think the timing of having this going forward when there is a new Secretary of State is really good, because if I was starting a new job and I got a really impartial study like this taken just from, rather than maybe the entrenched positions of the existing previous Secretary of State. So what it's doing is just setting the stall out, and I would certainly commend anybody who hasn't read every page to read page 44, 45, 46, 47, which is just the examples of how people fall into adult social care by mistake. The great majority of whom presume that it's a part of the NHS and will just be free and just tagged on to the end of seeing their GP or going to hospital. And they suddenly step into a world that they never knew existed. And it's a really, really, really good examples. Seriously, if you remember one thing from looking at this, it will be doing this. And that will help the Minister as well, the Secretary of State. And so overall, I think almost the main thrust of what we're doing is really important. The comments that come in are going to be adding more detail onto it. I believe that John and I will be very supportive of the main principles. And I'm actually quite pleased that they haven't given a personal view about which they think will work best. I personally quite like taxing people age 40 onwards on adult social care precept, on their income tax and all that, because actually that's when you start to think that you might need it. And anybody below 40 is busy trying to get lots of other things going in their lives. But that's one of the options. So it's a little bit like we need to just present as much information as we can to the Secretary of State and then see what comes back. But it's a really good report.
Yes, so I think it's fair to say, as Councillor Blunt has just said, overall we think it's a very good report. We agree with most of the commentary that's within the LGA Green Paper. We do think it's entirely right that the paper takes a much broader view than just adult social care. And we recognise the wider role that local authorities have in supporting local people, improving well-being. To that end, we think it's entirely appropriate that the government should address funding reform not just in adult social care but for local government as a whole, because otherwise all that happens is that other areas of local government suffer more greatly because of funding towards adult social care, and that would not be a sustainable position. In terms of some of the bigger questions, a lot depends on what it is you want to achieve, of course. So it depends on where your priorities are. So if one of your priorities is to further the integration of health and social care, then clearly making social care free at the point of delivery helps enormously, because so is healthcare. And whilst you have a differentiation of charging and funding mechanisms around health and social care, that makes it very complex for individuals to navigate and adds in a level of bureaucracy within the system. But clearly doing that is a much more costly option. And certainly then when you start to think about the solutions to meet those costs, you're then thinking about areas around income tax and national insurance as opposed to council tax precepts. Because a council tax precept gets you a couple of £100 million, an income tax rise gets you 10 billion. So you have to start thinking in terms, so it does depend on what your priorities are, I think, in terms of what your eventual solutions would be. I think within our response at the moment, and it's in draft, it's 15 pages long already, so we have given it some thought, although we're still adding to it. But at the moment, we're probably thinking, you know, a cap and floor mechanism could be a way of moving forward. That's certainly something that the government have previously said is their preferred option. One of the issues with that is that, well, the benefits of that are that it does to some degree protect people's assets if you have the cap and the floor in the right place. One of the issues is that it does mean that you have to have a much more bureaucratic process of assessment and intervention with people who, frankly, we don't currently. So what that would bring in, as was the previous case with the Care Act, was very large numbers of people in Leicestershire who fund their own care and don't have any involvement with the local authority, would all need accounts setting up with the local authority. We'd have to financially assess everybody, we'd have to maintain a running record of their accounts and their finances. So it becomes much more interventionist, and there's a level of bureaucracy built into that. Equally, if we were to have free personal care, it would just be that. It would only be free personal care. So there's no suggestion that the accommodation costs of care, for example, would be met. So there's still that level. So I think, you know, there may be a long-term solution and there may be interim solutions on the way. But certainly, you know, and I think the way that the LG have laid out the paper and said, actually, there's a whole range of solutions. What we need are some clear tests and some that we can judge each of these solutions against and go through a proper process and a transparent process. I think that's probably the right way to go ahead.
Thank you, John and Richard. Dr. Einan.
Thank you, Chair. And I think this is a very good report, and it's very good also to hear both Councillor Bunt and yourself, John Wilson, explaining your views on it, because I think this is truly has cross-party support, and it's really good to hear that it will be getting support from here. The comments I'd like to make, because as the Chair said, you've got to answer the responses 100 to 101, I mean, I think I would make it quite clear that my position on this, and I think I understood Councillor Bunt you to say something similar. There's a lot of simplicity in being free at the point of use, and people being taxed makes a lot of sense to me. And the amount of effort that we were going to put in when DILNOT was being thought of prevented that actually happening, and we just don't need to go through that again. The issues that brought out for me was page 67. Areas facing the greatest demand for services are those that are able to raise the least amount of money through the precept. And I think that is a very good argument for a more national form of funding. And other issues, page page 70, can't miss this one, the negative perception of the social care workforce. And I think John mentioned about the importance of actually paying for what we get. The work that carers, paid carers, do is incredibly stressful, and they deserve so much better, and no wonder we're struggling to get the workforce that people deserve. So we need to, this isn't going to be necessarily cheap, doing it as the LGA are asking. Other things that I think, yes, we do need to be funding primary care support in nursing homes and care navigators. I think that I had a very interesting meeting with Councillor Amanda Hack, who's on Health Scrutiny, and myself with Cheryl Davenport and Heather Pick about delayed transfers of care, where we're doing awfully well from our end. The NHS aren't doing so awfully well, and this does seem to be to do with a system that isn't working, and this system is, a lot of it, around families having to make impossible choices financially at a point when someone is being discharged from hospital, choices they don't want to make, and so end up people staying in hospital unnecessarily while they are trying to solve, to square an impossible circle. I think that public health, totally agree that we should be funding public health better. The public unhealth service, people who produce sugary snacks and alcohol and fatty foods and fast foods have got vastly more money than we have. It would be nice to have a little bit of that for us, wouldn't it? So I'm very glad for your support, and I hope these comments will help you to put together your report.
Anyone else have any questions, comments they wish to make? Mr. Harrison.
Thank you, Chairman. I think the crux of the whole problem is how we're going to raise the money. I think everybody's in general agreement that this is something that is of urgent need, that has to be attended to. My other point of concern is that we never hand this over to the National Health Service. I would think that what we do here at County Hall and the teams and the management, having spent 7.5 hours last week in 2 separate occasions talking to people from the National Health, didn't fill me with enthusiasm and energy. So I think that's a real absolute must, that we should fight our corner, that this must never go from our control, because I feel the people who are responsible, Chairman, are the people doing a really good job. It's how we can put this funding as a package, because we pay the national insurance stamp. We've got to try and think of language and words of how we could do this, because I know the police are now looking at how they're raising their taxation, and lo and behold, the Combined Fire Authority, they're all saying, well, we can all nibble into this pot, this is lovely, and the council taxpayers, it's a wonderful pot to be able to indulge, and can we actually go more so higher? So we have got to find a way through that is recognised without the pain and the disruption. It is acceptable. Most people find, Chairman, it's acceptable when you talk to them, would you pay an extra amount of money for the National Health? Most of them say to me, absolutely, no problem at all. But aren't we already putting lots of money into the National Health? So there is lots of confusion how this actually works. So it is actually getting the language and how we pitch the amounts of money and how the payment. The portfolio holder hit on an age bracket, which I won't disagree with, because I think people under a certain age level are buying homes, families, children, so their demands are there. But I think 40 beyond, but whether that would be enough people at that age with the ability to pay, would this create the pot? And here we go again. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Richard, I think you'd like to respond.
Yeah, I think Councillor Harrison's made a very good point there. I think we're throwing a lot of things that we've really got a very mature people would need to see addressed, and where the money comes from. And I think the local democracy is crucial. I do feel so strongly that no matter how we look at the NHS, I did Dr. Einon's intimate knowledge more than I have, we sort of know the bit that's missing in the NHS is accountability. No matter how anybody inside the system, it is just from the moment that it was created and the doctors were not made employees and had the independence in hospitals was a mistake. It didn't become a total package. So our little bit on the outside is very good. I think I find it strange but sort of reassuring to be on the same page as Dr. Einon on this. If you're not a politician but just a general, what a wonderful way to celebrate 70 years NHS by adding on social care as part of the deal. What an amazing thing to be the person who did that. you know what, if the Secretary of State did that and picked up that bravest thing, free at the point of use adult social care, going forwards, and this is how we're going to fund it through the plus 40 amount, whatever she did, that's amazing, because that's the next stage. Because we expected people to die soon after 65. That was the plan. That's when we set it up. Everybody died very soon after they retired, and now they don't. So that's actually why there's 20 more years to fund, and adult social care will keep people healthier. And it's prevention that is partly as well as just providing healthcare. It's helping them stay healthy and away from the NHS.
I'm really pleased I've got a few years left, Dr. Einer.
Thank you very much for letting me come back on that, Chair. And I'm absolutely delighted that Councillor Bunt and I are all definitely on the same page with this one. And I think we also are on the same page with the rest of the council, if you look at page 22. And I think Councillor Harrison should be pleased that this is something that we are already concerned about, is the problem of accountability. And in fact, the LGA, I liked the interesting assumption. I'm sure that some of my colleagues in the health service will hate me for saying this, but the idea that health and wellbeing boards could assume responsibility for commissioning primary and community care, to me, makes an enormous amount of sense. And I think the idea of the NHS had its 70th birthday. Social care Cinderella didn't even get invited to the party, did she? It would be very nice if we could put that right. And it's also going to be more cost efficient. A report that recently came to the 3 CCGs, their review of their mortality statistics, showed that about half of the people who were admitted to hospital and then died either in hospital or within 30 days. So these are people who are mostly, who are supposed to be going to die. Heaven help us, we all do. I know we're not supposed to notice that, but they shouldn't necessarily have been there. That if we had got better services in the community, if social care and the NHS actually were working together properly in the community, we might not have had to admit people to much more expensive hospital beds, where I know, certainly over the winter, there were a whole load of women who didn't get their reconstructive breast surgery because the beds that they should have been going into to have their operations were full of people who should have really been out in their community bed being looked after by an integrated primary care and social care service funded at the point of need, which would be wonderful. So thank you.
Right now, the speakers, I find myself in agreement with both Richard and Terry. I think the NHS does acute care brilliantly. It does the rest hopelessly, and I think if you put some sensible people in charge of the rest, we'd actually save a fortune and provide better service. So hopefully that point will go forward, and I think that seems to be the unanimous thoughts probably from the nods around this room of this committee. So thank you for that. We'll now move on to agenda item 10, which is on page 169, which is the draft Leicestershire and Rutland Living Well with Dementia Strategy 2019 to 22. I think it's with Sandy. Thank you, Sandy.
Thank you, Chair. From a governance point of view, this is really the same as the carers strategy you've dealt with previously. So we've got a draft Leicestershire and Rutland strategy that has previously been to Cabinet approved for consultation. The consultation's taken place and is now closed, and the outcome of that consultation is now what you're receiving, which outlines the responses to the consultation, summarises them. What you've also been given is the draft action plan, which, as with the carers, is Leicestershire plan. So there will be 3 delivery plans for each of the local authority areas. So what you've got is the draft plan, which outlines the county council's actions and also those of the health partners within Leicestershire, so the 2 West Leicestershire and East Leicestershire and Rutland CCG actions, which are outlined, and that's going to go on to Cabinet in October. So I think the purpose today is to give you an opportunity to receive the outcomes of the consultation and to pass on any comments that you have to Cabinet before they make the decision on the final strategy. In terms of the responses themselves, I think broadly there is support for the strategy. I think the really quite strong support really for most elements of the strategy. So I don't think there's any areas where there are any major concerns raised about the strategy itself. There's been a great deal of engagement in terms of developing the delivery plan since the consultation closed with carers and service user groups and with the key partners involved. I'm happy to answer any specific points that the committee might have on either the outcome of the consultation or the proposed draft implementation plan.
Thank you, Sandy. I think I'll just make the point. I think it's something we raised this morning at the chairman's briefing. Is that there's a theme with all the reports here today that, you know, I think overall we all believe that Leicestershire is doing a really good job on all of these things in terms of the papers we've looked at. But it all comes back to the first paper that we just debated. You know, we can do all the sticking plasters in the world, we can make all the changes we want, but if we don't have the vision of a green paper and where we're going with adult and social care, it is just that. So I think, you know, before I hand over to questions, I think from those people, the members of the group I've spoken to, I'd just like to pass on our thanks to the team for everything they've done in all of these areas in what is a financially challenging situation where we've shown very good outcomes for money spent. But we do recognise that going back on that first report and the green paper when it eventually, if it ever arrives, is going to be one of the most crucial documents and responses we ever do as a council. So, Dr. Inan.
Thank you, Chair, and yeah, I wholeheartedly agree with that. The LGA Green Paper should hopefully trigger some action. I just wanted to bring up a point, and I guess that for the same reason, that in a sense this is part of that overall response. On page 189, one of the action plans is to contribute a review to the workforce development offer to ensure focus on high levels of expertise when delivering personal care. As I said earlier, I think carers do an immensely stressful and difficult job. And a figure that was actually discussed at an East Midlands Council's meeting when we had Glenn Garrett come and talk to us was how little is actually spent on training our workforce. The workforce in health, there is about £1,400 per worker. In social care, it's £14. And however hard we work, we are doing it on a shoestring. And it comes back to that first paper. I think it would be good to know what we are doing with our tiny weeny amount of money to review the workforce and see what we could perhaps do better if we were funded a bit better.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Yes, I think the points are well made in terms of workforce, because I think ultimately, you know, having the right numbers of staff with the right skills and capabilities, and retaining those staff within the sector, I mean, those are absolutely key to improving the service, improving quality of services. And as was said previously, you know, we are actually going to have many more staff available, and the challenge is only going to get greater as the size of the workforce doesn't match the needs of the population, because we're going to have more and more older people, more and more people with dementia, and the numbers of potential staff within the workforce isn't going to increase. And that's a long-term structural problem. And we have a real issue with levels of turnover in the social care workforce, and most of whom work in the independent sector, the private sector. They're not employed by the council. Locally in Leicestershire, we've got what's called the Social Care Development Group, which is Leicestershire and Rutland partnership of the 3 local authorities. So we combine together to pool our resources to provide training to mostly to the independent sector providers. And it's an area that we've a long established record of working together, because essentially we've got providers who many of whom work across the boundaries. I mean, they're not confined to local authority boundaries, providers of all care and support services. And we offer either free or subsidised training to staff. Now, the volume of training we provide is probably way short of where it would need to be to get everything we want to do. And we have to prioritise the kinds of training that we deliver through that. We have prioritised dementia training. We've commissioned the University of Bournemouth to provide a whole range of dementia training, both a kind of introductory dementia awareness course and also a more intensive course really targeted at managers of specialist dementia services around improving the quality of dementia delivery. And that contract's very shortly coming to an end, and we're just looking at what we're going to be able to commission after that. And we're engaging with the sector to look at kind of, well, what did they think of what was offered, where we've had quite positive feedback, what do they think we can offer in the future. And I'd have thought dementia and mental health training generally for older people is going to be a priority going forward, because the feedback is that that's one of the most challenging areas that all services for older people have. It's not just specialist dementia services. All services for older people will have significant numbers of people with various stages of dementia within them, and we're enthusiastic to carry on with some dementia training offer. And I think this is probably one of the areas where we've probably got the greatest level of concern about service quality is in specialist dementia care. There's a lot of specialist dementia care that is not as good as we'd want it to be, and improving standards and the quality of life of people in those services is clearly a priority.
Again, if there are no other questions, I think the thrust of the question, I agree with Terry here, is that can we please fight, as I know John and Richard will, to retain whatever little bit of money we can for training our staff, because we think it's valuable within the parameters of what we can do as a council. But we do see it as a committee as important, and whatever we can do in that area, I think would be greatly appreciated by members of this committee. So we now go on to agenda item 11. Which is a report on the next steps in sustaining and developing the home care market, pages 213 to 216, which is with Sandy.
Thank you, Chair. Any members of the committee that have been here for some time will have had quite a number of reports on domiciliary care and the Help to Live at Home programme. So this is very much an update on the delivery of domiciliary care and where we are currently. I think it would be fair to say that delivering high quality domiciliary care is one of our most significant challenges in the social care sector generally, and Leicestershire is no exception to that. This is an extremely challenging area to get right. And one of the areas where the workforce challenges that have been mentioned a number of times are probably at their most acute, and actually recruiting and retaining and managing, motivating, training the workforce in domiciliary care is one of those really difficult areas. What the report's specifically doing is giving a bit of a general update on where we are in terms of the delivery of the framework for domiciliary care, which came into place in November 2016 and is due to continue on until at least November 2019. That contract can be extended by a further 2 years, and currently we are looking at whether the contract looking at that with our CCG colleagues of whether the contract should be extended. I think it's likely, the discussions we're having, that there will be some extension of that contract, but we're very much looking at what comes next, what the next stages are. So in terms of where we are in terms of delivery, we have the lead providers in place for all the lots, and the current arrangements are outlined from paragraph 10. So we've got just under 70% of the work with the lead providers in each of the areas, the 18 areas within Leicestershire, and we've got a further just over 30% who are with what we're calling supplementary providers. So that's other providers who are not the lead providers. And we've been working closely with the lead providers particularly to assist them with recruitment and retention of staff, to also to improve arrangements for picking up work to ensure that that's done as quickly as possible. And we're also putting in place a contract with the Carers Trust to provide a discharge response team to provide bridging packages. So that's where people need to leave hospital quickly, and where there is an issue about how quickly those care packages can be picked up within the lead provider. So we're ensuring that that can happen in a speedy way by commissioning specific bridging offer to do that. In terms of the longer term future of where we're going to go in terms of developing domiciliary care, we commissioned the Institute of Public Care at Oxford Brookes University to do a review of where we were in terms of implementing the model that we've set out in the report, that what we're trying to achieve within domiciliary care, but also to give us a steer in terms of the future direction. And the key points from that review they undertook and the post-implementation review we've done is outlined in paragraph 17, and outlines the priority areas and the actions, high-level actions that we're planning to take. So we've divided that really into two, where we've got a range of actions which are about making the way we work more effective and efficient now, and then the future, I suppose, next stages beyond November 19. We're now starting to scope that out with the CCGs so that we can understand what we want to work on, either together or separately, in terms of commissioning a future model of domiciliary care. And the key challenges there will be about how we come up with something that's more outcomes based. So we said that one of the aims we had for Help to Live at Home was to have a more outcomes based approach. We've made some steps forward in that, but I don't think anyone could say we were now at a point where we've commissioning an outcome based service. I don't think there's many services in the country that could say that they've truly got an outcome-based commission. So that's moving away from commissioning on the basis of time and tasks, where you say this person needs 3 calls a day, that these tasks to be undertaken, to moving away from that towards defining a range of outcomes which are about making people more independent and more able to manage within their own home, and defining those and then commissioning a service to do those things rather than specific care tasks. So we're scoping that out, and there will be then further proposals which will be developed with health partners, and I'm absolutely sure we will be bringing further updates back to you at some point in terms of what the steps are beyond for the model beyond the current framework.
Thank you, Sandy. Dr. Einer.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I'm sure we've all been following this story, and it's good to see that there's some stabilisation taking place. The problem with kind of short-term contracts is that there's always the risk of then destabilising everything again, in the hope that you find some better pot of gold beyond the next rainbow. So I'm concerned. I mean, I think that yes, you need to be able to change the detail of a contract, but I'd be a bit worried if we made the same mistake of bringing in providers who then suddenly have to fish in the same pond for the same workforce who it looks like they will run off to Amazon or something, which caused the collapse in this some time ago. So that's one question. And then the other one is measuring service user outcomes. Yes, I'd love to know what kinds of outcomes we're going to measure, and bearing in mind that we've discussed the carers strategy, are we going to be measuring carers strain as one of our outcomes?
I think there's a really good point about getting that balance between sort of change and stability. And I think that is always a balance that we're going to have to strike. But whatever happens with the providers, it's still the same workforce. I mean, new providers coming in don't bring in new staff with them from elsewhere. The workforce we've got is the local workforce. And I think what we've got to do is find employers, providers who have got the right approaches to provide a quality service and good arrangements for recruiting and retaining and supporting their staff. And we definitely want to do that. And I think inevitably that's really wanting to work with providers who actually have a strong local presence and have got the ability to provide that kind of stability and that kind of attractiveness to staff, because ultimately where problems have arisen, it's because employers have not been able to recruit and retain the staff, and that's the critical factor, that whatever we do, we have to make sure that we retain staff within the workforce, and inevitably I think that's going to mean improving conditions of employment for staff. And I think there have been improvements. This is, I don't think anyone could say that it's the best paid job, but actually, this isn't a minimum wage workforce anymore. I mean, because the reality is that employers would not be able to recruit staff at the minimum wage. The going rate has to be higher than that, and the minimum rate will probably have to be higher if we're going to this is going to remain sufficiently attractive for people to stay. And turnover rates are very high in domiciliary care, and that's a real problem in terms of maintaining the stability of the workforce. So I think I've forgotten your second point now.
That was about carers strain, and will that be an outcome?
Yeah, carers. And I put by carers strain, you mean paid carers strain? No, you mean this, the carers. Yeah, well, absolutely. Well, I think and the support that domiciliary care offer is really important in terms of the carers' experience, because quite often what matters to carers is that the care is right for the person they support, and that they have the right level of input into that care, and communication with carers is good. And that it provides carers with sufficient breaks, and domiciliary care is an important element of that. I think when we get feedback from carers, I'm sure that in part they'll be responding to that. Differentiating out domiciliary care particularly might be an issue, but it clearly is an important element of understanding what it is that carers require.
I guess what I was saying is, if you're measuring service user outcomes, then surely a service user outcome is that their carer is not under strain.
I think providing we can find a way of measuring it, that's the first thing. When we talk about the service user outcomes and the need to measure those, obviously we want those to be defined by the service user, otherwise it's not their outcome. And if a service user defines the impact on my relative, spouse, husband, wife, brother, sister, as being one of their outcomes, then absolutely we should be monitoring that, definitely. I think what's important is that we are measuring those things that are important to the people who are receiving the service, rather than just counting widgets.
Right, no further questions. I'll ask one, but I'll make an observation first. And Yeah, I think you mentioned, Sandy, about stabilising the service. I actually think personally it's better now. This committee's had lots of reports on this. I think we've done an exemplary job when problems have occurred. And I know we're going to discuss it under agenda item 13, but I think the evidence provided by the complaints demonstrates that not only have we more than stabilised the service, we are bucking the trending level of complaints. I think it's something we should be proud, and I was just a little bit surprised there wasn't more in the report about that level of complaints linking it. But my question is, and I hesitate to ask this, and the challenge will be I want an answer in not more than 2 minutes. But I look at paragraph 5, the first line, help to live at home is an essential component of the STP. Where is the STP? What is it? Is it happening? And you'll probably say I should know, but I honestly don't, so I'll ask the question for all of us.
So very recently, the clinical commissioning groups have published a paper, a refreshed paper on better care together. You'll recall that the Cabinet, and I think it was in actually at the end of the LGA paper that we looked at earlier, the Cabinet's resolution around the STP was not to sign up to a joint STP with our health colleagues and to see that as an NHS document to which the Council would be a consultee. So a refreshed Better Care Together policy statement has been published on the CCG websites. I think that was published last month with the updated statement around the STP. The work continues obviously in terms of some of the aspects of the original STP development, particularly around the reconfiguration of hospital beds, which is something that is clearly subject to further capital approvals through the NHS process. Work also continues in terms of integrating health and social care services at the point of delivery. 2 major pieces of work on that are that we're working towards having integrated locality teams based around primary care. We're piloting those this month. So the first pilots of those MDT meetings, multidisciplinary team meetings, start this month, and there are 3 pilots across Leicester, Leicestershire and Rutland, and the Leicestershire pilot is in Hinckley and Bosworth. And the second tranche of that is that we are working closely with colleagues in the Leicester Partnership Trust to develop an integrated reablement and intensive support service, bringing together our heart reablement service and the ICS service within Leicestershire Partnership Trust, and we hope that that will be operational by October.
Thank you for that, John. Longer than 2 minutes, but I'll let you off in the circumstances. Could I now invite Robert Lake to join us? Thank you for coming, Robert. Robert is the independent chair of the Leicestershire and Rutland Local Safeguarding Adults Board and is here to present the board's annual report. So thank you, Robert.
Thank you, Chair. Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for the invitation and the opportunity to present the annual report. I do so with a little bit of trepidation in that I was not the chair at the time that this report covers. It's stated in there. Simon was the chair last year. He did a sterling job, but I've been appointed now to chair the board here for Leicestershire and Rutland. I also chair, incidentally, the same board in Leicester City because we're trying to work together to get much more synergy in what we do. You'll be delighted to know, Chair, I'm not going to go through the whole of the report. I will just pick up 1 or 2 of the key points from the covering report. It says here, if we look at section 6 or paragraph 6, the board is beginning to, has now, as it were, is no longer working as closely in partnership with the Safeguarding Children Board as it was, albeit we do still, Simon and I make sure that we are still singing off the same page, as it were. And increasingly we're trying to see where we can make sense of things going on in the city as much as in the county and in Rutland. That's not least because, as you'll be aware, I believe the Local Safeguarding Children Board will actually disappear by about this time next year or soon after, New arrangements are having to be put in place, so that is already going off on a slightly different tangent. And just in the context of that, further on in the report, it talks about our financial support that the board receives. That's all up in the air at the moment whilst there's discussions going on the safeguarding arrangements for children. Basically, I think that in summary, I can say that the Safeguarding Adult Board in Leicestershire and Rutland is in good heart. It is well supported by officers, it's well supported by our various partners who work alongside us all, and as I say, it is in good heart. The key messages, looking at paragraph 10, are that not only the partners working together, that perhaps most importantly, so are the practitioners at the front line. They're working very well together. Making safeguarding personal, which I assume you're familiar with, but just in case you're not, it's actually what's called a sector-led sort of improvement programme. It started originally with the Association of Directors of Adult Social Services and was then adopted by the LGA. It really sets out a number of things that we should do in order to try and bring our service users along with us and make it personal to them. John referred earlier in answer to a question about the need for us to do what the actual service user wants us to do, rather than us be directive as to what we think they should do. And that is now getting very well embedded within the whole of the safeguarding arrangements across the county. Financial abuse does remain a problem in this part of the world, and more recently, or in response to that, Adult Social Care has paid for 2 trading standards officers within the county who will work alongside Adult Social Care to try and address that particular problem. The Mental Capacity Act continues to be a challenge, not just here. It's a national problem. In that workers out there, although the Mental Capacity Act has been enforced now for a number of years, there still isn't quite the understanding of it amongst practitioners that we would hope there should be. So we're making a real push on it now and into the future to try and ensure that happens. Parts of that Act have been recently reviewed by the Law Commission and some changes are in the offing. We've seen some of the drafts, but we're still to await the final version. And overall, the board is very good at challenging each other. Board members challenge each other on their performance to ensure that we are getting it right for the people of Leicestershire. So basically, Chair, I just invite the committee to comment on the report. As you know, this is also going to your cabinet later this week. It's also going to the Rutland Scrutiny Committee later in the month. It is still in draft, so if you have any comments, if any changes are required, we would happily make them. If I can just finally, Chair, just turn to page 248 of the annual report, which is talking about what we're doing now, because clearly the annual report, by its very definition, is a backward look. Just a very brief forward look. We've set ourselves 4 particular priorities to continue with our prevention programme. I think there's been a theme running through what I've heard already today, that it's much better to prevent things rather than try and intervene afterwards, and we are doing all that we can, particularly around self-neglect. Self-neglect nationally is becoming a major difficulty, and it's often about the awareness not only of the individual themselves but also their friends, family, neighbours, that we can actually intervene earlier and prevent some of the worst tragedies, some of which have led to death. Mental capacity, as I've already said, is something we want to major on. Thresholds, this is where any one agency will decide whether or not the case meets its criteria for intervention. We've recently published new threshold guidance, and that's now going into place. And engagement, the board, as I say, is a very good board with very good representation, but the one thing we don't have is the voice of the user on the board. It's a very difficult nut to crack. It is not easy at all, but working alongside colleagues in the city, there is work going on to try and bring in broader engagement of service users and their families into the work of the board. And just very finally, Chair, if I can just say, in terms of updates and as we go along. Each quarter or so we publish this called Safeguarding Matters. It's actually by, it's not just the adult board, it's also the children's board. It is available online, so if you go onto the LSAB website you'll find it. It's just an update so that if any members here are interested from time to time as what's going on currently, that gives you a pretty good picture. And apart from that, Chair, I'd welcome any comments, questions from the committee.
Thank you very much. Mrs. Fryer.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you very much, Mr. Lake. It's a very interesting report. I'd like to draw your attention to page 241, which is under the audits thing. I was rather disappointed to read that due to bad weather, the final multi-agency discussion and analysis did not take place at the end of the year, and the findings of this will be reported in the next annual report. I know winter was quite severe at times, but I don't think we had months and weeks when people either couldn't get together by video conferencing, telephone conferencing or something. And I just think audits are very important. All scrutiny is, and audits is one part of scrutiny. And I do find that, and I appreciate you weren't in the post at that time, that's a rather weak explanation of why an audit and discussion did not take place, an analysis. So that's other than that. And also under the same page that the Fire and Rescue Services and Public Health did not submit any responses. So I'm sure going forward this will be looked at, but I just think we deserve a bit of an explanation. Thank you very much. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. I can't give you another explanation than the one that's in here, weak as it may sound. The important thing is that that safeguarding audit has now been completed. It was completed quite early in this financial year. So I can reassure you it's been done and the learning is being taken forward. Often the only way you can actually do some of this audit work is actually to get people together. And I take your point about, you know, modern technology, but there are times when you actually need to see people eyeball to eyeball, as we are now. So I don't know the detail of that, but I can imagine the circumstances. What I'm satisfied about or confident about is that the work was picked up and dealt with and concluded as quickly as possible.
If I may, Chair, maybe in your preamble to us, or in your letter, or your document at the front, it could have been clarified that everything had been now in place, and maybe as this is a draft you may like to add that in, because I'm sure other people other than me will pick things up. We're a bit like that.
It's a helpful comment, Chair. I'm quite happy to. I don't think we'll get it done necessarily in time for the Cabinet report because that's already going forward, but at Cabinet I will make the point that you made to me and I will expand a little upon it.
Dr. Bremner.
Thank you, Chair. Could take you to page 247, please. I was glancing down the numbers and I suddenly began to realise that some of the numbers didn't total correctly. So you might find, and you have to confirm this for yourself, that your contributions are about 3,000 lower, but your expenditure, thankfully, is quite considerably lower than that. But you might want to just check those figures.
Again, Chair, that's a very fair comment. I haven't done the sums myself, but I will go away and do them and, again, as necessary, make amendments.
You might come out with a better balance.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Which we may well need for things like safeguarding adult reviews. Thank you very much.
All right, any further questions or comments? Thank you, Robert, for coming. I appreciate you haven't had many questions, but at least you will go away with a strong sense that everybody has read the report in extreme detail. So to spot these things. So thank you very much for your time of coming here, and most appreciate it. So thank you. Right, we'll now go on to agenda item 13, which is the annual Adult Social Care Complaints and Compliments Report 2017-18, which is with Simon Parsons.
Thank you, Chair, and good afternoon, everyone. So this report is one of a number of complaints annual reports, but specifically focused on adult social care. I won't go through all the detail of the report, but do want to just focus on some of the key findings and themes that come out from this year's report. I'll start with the data around volume. So there has been a 14% increase in volume this year. That's not untypical for sort of the national average, the national picture. And broadly, although the previous years have ebbed and flowed, it's broadly consistent with the trajectory over a long-term view. The important thing is volume increase in itself is one factor, but it can indicate a number of different things. It can indicate, obviously, that there genuinely are more complaints. It can also mean that we're better at recording complaints that were always out there but we perhaps weren't capturing before. So it's important it's seen as one factor to look at. In terms of decisions around complaints, we saw a reduction in the numbers of complaints where we found fault this year. And that's the first time that we've seen a reduction for the last couple of years. So that dropped by 8% with fault found in 42% of the cases. Now, on the face of it, that's positive, but with these things, it's only a positive if we know that and that there's reassurance that those decision making or around the uphold rates is correctly done and robust investigations have been carried out. And on that note, I think I draw attention specifically that the report provides good reassurance of that, in that findings of fault by the local government ombudsman when complaints have gone on to them fell from findings of fault in 7 cases last year to just 2 this year, which is a significant improvement. So that's 20% of the cases they looked at. The Ombudsman's last annual report indicates that adult social care is the area they find most fault with when they look at complaints. So it's the area they uphold most, around 54%. So 20% rate compares very well with the Ombudsman's data in that regard. Again, importantly, no financial remedies were instructed by the Ombudsman for the 2017-18 year, which I think is the first time since we centralised the complaints function back in 2011. So that's all pleasing performance. Responsiveness to the complaints has dropped slightly this year. It isn't a big drop, and we're still resolving 81% in 20 working days. And importantly, just 1 complaint outside of statutory timescales, which was a joint working complaint with a CCG and was 3 days outside of statutory timescales, so not severely. As I say, the figures are not a big slide, but I am working closely with the department around just addressing that just slight downward curve and rebalancing that to ensure that remains a key focus. In terms of what's driving complaints, the most common theme is around assessments and care planning. That's often quite a subjective area involving professional decision making at the heart of it, and that will be a factor behind the reduction in the uphold rates. It's far less black and white to determine whether there's fault with quality of assessments and decisions made than it is, for example, around whether an invoice was correct or not, which is much more black and white. So that will be a factor both in our local uphold rates and indeed the Ombudsman rates. It's also pleasing to see that the areas which have featured prominently in last year's annual report, principally around home care, which the Chair already noted earlier, and indeed mental health wait lists and resource allocations have stabilised this year, and we've seen good reductions on that, showing that the actions taken last year have proved to be longer term and making a difference. That's really good to see. The report contains some good examples of how we've used Complaints Insight this year, again, to drive service improvements. Pages 276 to 277 gives some good examples of that. And we're definitely moving in the right direction around drawing learning out of complaints. This year we map out where we can identify clear service improvement in complaints that are upheld. And that's running at 31%. We can still improve that, but it is moving in the right direction. Just the last couple of things to touch on, really. That I'm also doing a significant amount of work in terms of developing managers' toolkits with complaints and helping with that. So some revised training being delivered to managers and really touching on some of all areas of complaints management, including effective responses, root cause analysis, drawing the learning, those sort of things. And that's an area I'm committed to continuing to do, because culture of complaints handling is vitally important to successfully ensuring that we continue this positive progress. In conclusion, it's a largely positive report, Chair, offering reassurance to members that culturally the department is listening and responding to complaints maturely. Again, I'd look at, despite the volume increase, the small volume increase, set against the wider context of the overall workload in the department, that volumes remain quite low in terms of formal complaints, coming in at 1.9%. Finally, just to recognise, our complaints team also pick up the good news stories, so the compliments that come in, and I'm pleased to report that that's on the rise for the third consecutive year. I think it's an area we always underreport, but it's good to see that has risen steadily over the last couple of years of where those compliments are coming in. It helps give balance and showcase really the areas where we are getting things right and doing well. I think those are the key themes I'd like to highlight, but welcome any questions.
I know Richard wants to come in, but just before I let him, I've just made the point to me that the figure that pleased me most was actually on page 8 under staff conduct, because I think that actually shows that we've embedded in to the organisation the way to deal with these. So if the staff conduct is right, I think everything else follows, and that to me was one of the key things I pointed out. I just wanted to mention before I let Richard come in. Sorry, Richard.
Thank you, Chairman. I just want to say that Simon's report to me shows that we're not complacent about complaints. It's something I've always taken seriously. It's always very easy to find a reason to justify complaints or a change of the way we deal with things, but I think the way that you just heard the report was a confidence about it. We know there will be complaints. We know that we have a severely rationed service, that we'd like to please more people and give more people services than we can. So we know we've got a system under a huge amount of strain. Therefore, the complaints will be part of that. Some organisations might choose to write off complaints, say, well, that's just the nature of what we do. But you've heard today that we take it very seriously, and certainly in members' briefing, we stop and pause on this. There's a confidence in the way that John runs the department, that we are open to criticism, and if we're doing something wrong, we're going to learn. And I'm pleased with the complaints procedure so far, and I hope you are too. Thank you, Tim.
Dr. Rynan.
I just wanted to comment on the way that we are now learning from complaints, and I do feel that there has been over the years an increasingly good systemic focus on using complaints to transform this organisation, and I think this is a very good document. I love the stories. I like the way that you've put those in, and I think that they do give the impression that we are genuinely listening, and that people know that when they make a complaint, and this is what most complainants want, they want the next person not to have to suffer the way that they have, and that's the same in my own profession as well as in this building. And I think we've come a long way with this. So thank you very much, Simon, for bringing this report.
Thank you, Dr. Rynan. Thank you, Simon. I don't think there's any further questions, so we move on to what on my agenda says the final item. And just while Matt's approaching the table, I'd just like to recall my personal thanks to Richard for coming today. I know he's in severe discomfort, and I think other people may not have turned up, but it's always valuable for Richard to be here. So could I thank Richard on behalf of the committee for limping along, literally, to the meeting. And now that's given Matt time to get into his seat. So the final item is the performance report 2018-19, quarter one, April to June.
Thank you, Chair. Good afternoon, everybody. Yes, this is correct. This is the regular report we bring here 3 or 4 times a year and covers the period April to June this year, which is the first quarter of 2018-19. A new approach was taken slightly with the report this year, where we've set our targets for 3 years. This takes us up to the year 2021. The aim of these targets is to be in the top 25% of councils nationally, or at least above the average of shire authorities. For the intervening period, including the current year we're in at the moment, milestones have been agreed on the pathway towards those 3-year targets. It's against these milestones that performance in this report have been RAG rated. Overall, there were 23 metrics RAG rated in the first quarter. 15 were classed as green and meeting the target, or the milestone should I say, while the remaining 8 performance needs to be improved slightly. Just take a moment just to highlight a few areas of good performance and areas for improvement. Firstly, library issues. There were 361,000 issues made between April and June 2018. This is 1% higher than the previous year. Secondly, delayed transfers of care. We've had in previous reports information highlighting the trend in reducing the number of delayed discharges from hospital attributable to adult social care. The first quarter of 2018-19 was no difference. There was actually a 76% reduction compared to the comparable period last year. During the 3-month period, there were on average 62 delayed days per month, and that compares to an average of 188 per month last year. Finally, 8 out of 10 people aged 18 to 64 with a learning disability were in settled accommodation. This continues an improvement that we've seen over the last 4 years. A couple of examples where performance fell short of the milestone. Firstly, visits to libraries. We've spoken previously about the national trend, or acknowledged it, in terms of the reduction in visits, and this was no different during the first quarter of this year. It should be noted, however, that during this period there have actually been closures to libraries in order for adaptations to smart libraries to take place. I'm sure this will have affected the number of visits and possibly the number of issues that we've seen increase, perhaps people taking out more books in advance of knowing that that library was going to be closed for a short while. Secondly, between April and June this year, 91% of carers received a service through a direct payment. Now this falls short of the 95% milestone that we've set. However, unlike some indicators which are based on a snapshot point in time, this is actually a cumulative indicator, and we'd expect that number to increase as we go through the year. So in conclusion, performance against the majority of the metrics are progressing very well, whilst there are some areas where improvement is required. An update of the national performance will be published by NHS Digital in the autumn, later in the autumn, and we'll bring a comparative position for Leicestershire to the committee in January. So I welcome any questions or any comments that you have to make.
I think it would appear, Matt, unless I'm to the contrary, you have stunned silence. So I think you have. Oh no, Dr. Ryan has just waved at me.
No, I was particularly interested in the library, the e-books, and I noticed that we're loading more e-books out, and I think that's a good thing and a way of moving forward. And one of the thoughts that came to my mind was, I'm sure I've seen somewhere in another report that we're delaying replacing the mobile library service. Now, to me, this seems a very sensible thing to be doing, because if you can sit at home and choose from thousands of books rather than whatever handful come out in a mobile library, that's brilliant. But are we looking at whether or not the people who previously relied on the mobile libraries are going to be able to enjoy the benefits of the increasing e-library service that we've got, and if they can't do it yet, having certainly seen work done in care homes with people with dementia, getting them to use iPads and Skype, and it is, you know, is this something that we're looking into so that we can be more efficient as we move forward with e-books?
Yes, that's a good question. We are not directly intending to replace mobile libraries with e-loans, albeit that, as you quite rightly point out, the use of mobile libraries is decreasing and declining, particularly in some areas of the county, and the issue of e-books is going up. Whether there is a direct correlation actually is something that it might be useful to look into in terms of the areas where those e-loans are taking place and compared to the mobile. That might be something worth having a look at. I think it's fair to say we are doing a promotional, an amount of promotional activity in terms of the e-loans. Certainly within the libraries we do have demonstrations of how people can access the e-books, of how to use different pieces of equipment, different apps that you can download in order to access. So that is certainly taking place within libraries. I'd have to check whether or not that's also taking place within the mobile library service. So I don't think we specifically target the people who use mobile libraries, but possibly we could. Certainly there's an amount of social media that we use as well to promote e-learning and e-books. The mobile library service is, as I said, declining in some areas, and we have looked at some routes whereby there are stops where nobody uses the stop. There are some stops where we have just one or two people using them, and you think, well, it might be sensible to rationalise. But at the moment, we just use the e-loans and the e-books in the same way that we do physical books. It's just an alternative means of getting a book out of the library. Clearly, it's becoming more and more popular. So it is something that we do need to continue to ensure that we've got an accessible offer for.
Dr. Bremner.
Hi, in terms of library and perhaps also heritage visits, it's not just books, it's DVD loans, it's IT hubs, it's searching for jobs on those IT hubs, it might be providing paper for children to draw, to track families in. So there's a lot more to our library than a book. And I was just surprised to hear the comments only about book when referring to our library in the report. And I think it's much more than that. And that's what the visits are about. It's how you attract families in, how you attract individuals into a space. And the other question was, and I'm going to tie this to heritage as an attraction, do we commercialize library spaces or the new heritage hub that might be developed with merchandise that are appropriate to a library that people would like to buy, like, I don't know, rubbers, rulers, pencils, badged local items, so that people could source merchandise and sell at a profit. Because I think people in libraries are not just there to look at books.
That's absolutely right. Our libraries are absolutely multi-use spaces. They all act as community hubs. The community managed libraries are a good example of how communities can engage around the library, but equally the retained libraries also have quite a big emphasis on supporting local people and local communities. Quite a lot of people use our libraries simply to use the IT equipment, or actually for social contact. We do quite a lot of work through our libraries, specifically with people who have dementia, or for people who are carers of people with dementia. So we have dementia singing clubs, we have all sorts of things going on in the libraries, that reading.
Just a quick thought though. Sometimes we're complacent about a library. We all kind of know, we think we know what it does. But do the libraries actually advertise outside their building what they have? People might not realize they have free use computers in there. They might just think books. Yeah. So if you actually display what is in a library on the outside of the building, you might actually attract people into the building.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. We can look at that. I think, obviously, the development of the smart libraries is an opportunity to do some of that rebranding work and to do some proper communications and PR as each library opens through having been redeveloped. We can certainly do some of that work. In terms of commercialising the libraries, each library does have a small amount of sort of goods to buy, things like greeting cards and, as you say, pens, pencils, that kind of thing. Within each library we have those opportunities. But as a council, we are also looking to develop our commercial strategy and our commercial approach. So I know that Nigel and the service managers in the library service have been talking to colleagues in our commercial services around those options.
I think as part of my sort of introduction into this sort of portfolio, I visited various libraries and museums throughout the county over the last sort of 2 or 3 months, and I think certainly Bosworth Battlefield Centre has, you know, a fantastic shop stocked with, you know, correct items. I think I went to Charnwood Museum in Loughborough that had a good stock of Ladybird books, because obviously that was the home, and they've got a huge display there of what went on. So I think there are products there. I think certainly in the community libraries, they are self-advertising themselves because they want people to come in. They need people to come in to make it work as part of the community hub, and I think that is exactly what they're doing. I know when we went to the libraries, there are placards outside that say books, DVDs, print on CDs, and obviously all the services, the learning services that we do through adult learning as well. Certainly in the Loughborough, I was very impressed with the classrooms and the setups there, so trying to get people in there. And I was surprised at 10 o'clock in the morning how full that library was. It was a very busy place. So, yeah, I think we are aware, but yeah, certainly looked at it and try and take that forward.
Right, well, thank you, members. We've got through in a reasonable time, and I promised Dan at 4 o'clock. Just to remind members that the next meeting of the committee will be on the 6th of November, and you are reminded to bring sleeping bags with you, camp beds, etc., because we will be meeting in the morning for normal agenda items, and then in the afternoon to discuss the proposed local government reorganisation. So I would suspect 11 o'clock start, probably 11 o'clock finish. So see you all on the 6th of November.